So welcome Andrew and Charlotte to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. And actually this is a first. It's the first time that I'm interviewing two people at the same time. So it's pretty exciting. And the last time that Andrew was on, it was the first time I had interviewed a Kiwi as well. So it's all very exciting.
Yeah.
Would you like to introduce
Two's the price of one.
Oh, well, so nice to meet you. So I'm Charlotte Lockhart. I'm the CEO of 4 Day Week.
And I'm Andrew Barnes. I'm the founder of Perpetual Guardian and the architect of 4 Day Week.
Brilliant. Welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. Now, we are in the middle of the Future of Work series. And when this sort of first came about and people started talking about flexible working, I immediately thought about my conversation that I had with Andrew, where we were talking about the 4 Day Week and we were talking about kind of outcomes versus inputs, essentially. But I'd love to get your take on, given that we're in the future of work, your take on the immediate impact that COVID-19 is going to have in New Zealand, globally, in Ireland, any thoughts that you have, and then the kind of longer term prospects for the future of work.
Well, I think in the short term, what I think we're seeing is that the COVID pandemic has actually accelerated the discussion that we're going to have about flexible working. You've seen it, you've got, Google, Twitter, they're sending people home saying, in fact, you don't necessarily need to come back till the end of the year. We've got Optus, big telco in Australia, has said that don't come back to the office ever. We're going to go working from home. And closer to Ireland, obviously, you've had the chief executive of Barclays starting to speculate whether, in fact, there is a return to office work in the concept of a 70,000 person bank in the UK. So I think flexible working will be the big winner here, at least in the short term, and that part of it will be driven by social distancing. I mean, certainly our own business, we can only, if we ever got the whole team back into the office, we could only have half the team in at any point in time. So I think that's now, just as a matter of fact, going to come up the agenda.
Yeah, and I think that so it's quite an exciting time as far as that's concerned, if there's a silver lining to what is happening with COVID. And I think enlightened businesses will look at the cost saves they can have by actually having a flexible workforce. One of the things that we saw when we were talking to businesses around the world is that the biggest obstacle to this, of course, was leadership fear of being able to trust their staff, and fear of not really understanding how to measure their productivity when they did go home or work flexibly. So now we've kind of jumped over that fear because we've been forced to go home. And so now businesses have understood how flexible working can work in their businesses. And we hear stories of people being on all day Zoom calls so their managers can supervise them. And I suspect there's a little bit less of that now.
Yeah.
Because, the poor supervisors having to do that, that's a dreadful idea. But I think that, over time we will learn a new way of working.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have heard that story as well. I'm not sure exactly where it stemmed from, but I can't imagine that's, someone supervising you literally just by looking at a camera that's pointing at you when you're supposed to be working. So like what happens when you need to go to the bathroom or when you want to take a break, or like physically being in front of your laptop all day is very draining anyway.
True, but you see, this is the point. If you think about it, that's what we were doing at work.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So depending on your office structure, all you actually were doing, and this was of course the thesis that started the 4 Day Week, that actually all you did was you used time as a surrogate for productivity. So to put it a different way, if I have the people in my office, my open plan office, actually isn't that just a very large Zoom screen? And all I'm doing is I'm looking at them and going, well, they're here, therefore they must be working.
Yeah.
And therefore there is no difference.
Yeah.
We merely virtualized the same inability to understand productivity, which I find quite remarkable.
Yeah.
But that's the point. So what this then has done is this big issue, and Charlotte said one part of it was around trust. Second part of it is suddenly company after company is coming back and going, our productivity didn't drop. Now, okay, you may have got an overall drop in activity because the economy is, slower. There's not as much going on. But if you sit and look at the tasks that people do and how long it takes them to do it, I think employer after employer is reaching the conclusion that actually, without the distractions, without the issues, people were doing those jobs quicker, which is the thesis, of course, again, of the 4-day week, which is you change your working behavior to enable you to be more efficient. It was just forced on you. Now, okay, there are people who struggle. They've got small children, dogs, partners, all sorts of other things that could be a distraction. So leave that aside. You've got to, not everybody could have an office area where they could work, quietly and without interruption. But the generalization holds true.
And it would be nice to see that if we, get to a point where the children go back to school and companies maintain the flexible and remote working policy as an opt-in for their staff. And with those parents who, if you think about it, I think it's highly ironic that the people who were wanting flexible and remote working previously were the parents, and we gave it to them and homeschooling the children at the same time. They're like, no, that's not what I had in mind at all. So it would be lovely that once the kids go back to school, I mean, in New Zealand, our children are broadly back to school, but I think yours are probably not going to go back until the new school year. Once that is in place, what the productivity will look like for those people, because they've had to work out how to do their jobs and have small children around.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that they'll be really productive when we remove the children from the home.
This is it. Yeah. I loved what you said, Andrew, about the office space being this virtual Zoom room, effectively. Like, to me, it's the epitome of presenteeism, isn't it? Like, if your boss is still in the office, you stick around, because if you're seen to leave, it kind of looks like you're not working anymore, even if you're going to open up your laptop at home anyway. So this whole concept of just being seen at work is under the assumption that you're doing the work, that you're being productive.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I love this. I just made a note of it there. Time as a surrogate for productivity. I just love that whole concept as well. And yeah, absolutely. And I've heard stories on both sides where, on the one hand, it's like, brilliant, I can get so much more work done because I'm at home. But as you mentioned, on the other hand, you've got kids, you've got dogs, you've got, chores and whatever else as distractions. And, it's trying to find the balance with those. But if
it is.
And good business leaders have been taking the pulse of their staff through all of this.
Yeah.
And have been surveying them. And obviously the surveying's got a little bit more active here because we've got a much more defined return to work program. But most of them seem to be finding that about 70% of their staff want to maintain a flexible and remote working structure of some sort. And in fact, our main newspaper here, the New Zealand Herald, ran a survey, and which about 10 days ago, and I checked in on it again the other day, and only 12% in their survey said that people wanted to go back to work exclusively. Everyone else wanted, about half the others wanted this combination. Or fully remote.
And of course, the point is, and it's slightly different when you're doing homeschooling, I'll buy that, but the distractions caused by dogs, partners, and children are there even if you're not there. Because one of the things that you've got to deal with is, you've got an issue with the children at school, or you need to go and pick them up. Or
when you're at work, yes.
Yeah. So a lot of these distractions were there. And again, that was part of the thesis behind the 4-day week. That was really saying, look, how can I, if I gave you more time, so all of those distractions that are caused by life, if I can corral them into a separate day, then you've got more time at the weekend. That's the thing that makes the difference. You actually just basically, we have problems because we didn't have enough time. Create more time, your ability to segregate work life and home life becomes that much easier.
Yeah. The life admin that kind of creeps into your everyday work, whether it's planning your holidays or checking your social media or whatever it might be.
That's right.
I mean, the economic impact for businesses to reduce the amount of people that they have in big offices. I mean, the Barclays example with their massive office with 7,000 people in Canary Wharf. you know, we've got one business here who has 2 floors in the most expensive building in Auckland. He thinks after this he'll be able to go down to 1 floor. Well, that's massive. He's already paid for the staff to have screens and ergonomic chairs, and all of that cost is already there. He's paying a small amount for them to cover internet costs and things. That's already done. That's a sunk cost. So why would he perpetuate that by continuing to have space that he now no longer needs if he takes this course of action?
And I think, you know, we're looking at it. So if I look at our business, so our business is similar to that. We've got 4 floors effectively in a building in central Auckland. We dropped one already. We will look very seriously to drop another, which in fact we've got plans to drop another one next year, but we might in fact drop 2. We will reduce the size probably of our office in Wellington. And what we're then doing is, well, let's actually rethink this when we're recruiting in the future. We've got these little offices around the country. It's similar to the Barclays argument. Actually, we might now be recruiting more staff to do some of the admin jobs that we would have put in head office. They may be in these branches around the country. That enables us to perpetuate the 4-day week even more efficiently, because the small branches are the ones that often suffer because you get down to 1 or 2 people in the office if you've got people out. But actually that will be our new model. And I also have a view that actually work will actually start to be the place you go to socialize. It will not be the place you go to work. So you will work from home for a few days. You will go to work for a few days, and obviously you'll have your rostered for 5th day off or whatever it is. But actually the main purpose of being in the office will be to spend time with your colleagues, to have team meetings, to do all that socializing and collaborative stuff. And so in fact we will see a complete inversion of the concept. We will go to somewhere to work, to socialize. We will work at home, and that is a really interesting development.
And the economic benefits for a country when they do that, you're taking all of that busyness that happens around a central city, and you're pushing it out into the regions. And if you think about it, once you're released from your garden and you are able to work remotely, when you go for coffee, it won't be to the cafe in downtown Dublin, it will be to the cafe in your local village. And so therefore you're actually dispersing the money that is spent much more widely through. So economically it's quite good for a country as well, because the hiking yourself into your central city is just a whole pile of traffic.
And that means, you know, we've modeled it for Auckland, so we know if Auckland got to free flow, that's probably going to add about 2% to Auckland GDP. So you take the traffic out, that's going to have an economic benefit. We've got a situation that the council here is, you know, like councils everywhere now, is going to have very little money. Now they are responsible for the infrastructure, but suddenly if you don't need to build more rail links, more road links, because people are not traveling, it's peak that causes the problem. It's not flow during the day. So if in fact that's not occurring, you don't need to invest in that infrastructure anymore. It's much more local infrastructure. You know, we know that the benefits of being at home will have the health benefits that, you know, bizarrely, you're seeing some of those and you're losing some of those at the moment in COVID. But very clearly, there will be lots of positive economic outcomes for governments dropping off a change to flexible working. And the estimates of the impact of flexible working being applied broadly, you know, run into tens of trillions of dollars globally.
Wow.
Because of what it will do to stimulate the economy. And then, you know, latterly, the other point here, you know, where we have got literally a destroyed industry in the form of tourism. If you can stimulate domestic tourism, maybe that will fill the gap a little bit. Well, if you give people more time off, they actually have more time to travel domestically. And in our case, you can't leave the country anyway, so you got no choice. So what that will then do is that will also create more economic activity, but not just concentrated, but, you know, dispersed throughout the country. So I think there's lots of real benefits for this if it's actually handled correctly.
But I think, and you know, and then obviously there's the environmental side of things. And we've all been enjoying the clear skies and the pictures of Everest from Kathmandu, and we all recognise the benefits of that. And there are obviously economic benefits that sit alongside that. One of the things, we had a Zoom call very early on with the CEO of one of the world's largest photocopier supplies company, and his business has gone down by 80%, which is obviously sad for them. And you know, obviously they're a reasonably large employer throughout the world, so that's obviously not great. However, it just goes to show you 80% of paper is not being photocopied on now. We are not doing that activity. We are learning to be more digital in the way that we transact work. You know, so even just having meetings by Zoom, we will probably not go back to doing all of those face-to-face meetings that we used to do, because it's just easier and more acceptable to just do it by Zoom now. We've got through that. I can transact. We had one of our staff members, she was saying they had a part of our business is we give money away for clients. And one of our business leaders was saying that she ran a process that normally would have taken 2 months, because they'll have done it all physically. They did it in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So those sort of efficiencies are hard to deny in terms of the benefit that they have. But again, back to the environmental impact, it's outstanding.
Well, and funnily enough, I did my first physical board meeting yesterday. So normally the board meetings we've been running have all been on Zoom, very, very efficiently. Fantastic. So we did a tangible, real board meeting. There was one director who couldn't get in and was on Zoom. But the rest of us, because of our rules, were spaced 2 meters apart.
Yeah.
Now, I needed a telescope to see the director at the far end of the room. Yeah. We all had to have microphones because we were so far. If you actually were going to just speak, you couldn't hear it. So we're all pressing our buttons. It was like United Nations.
Yeah.
Now,
easier to have stayed on Zoom.
It would have been easier to stay on Zoom, actually, and I wouldn't have had to go into the office. I wouldn't have had to do what I did for a meeting that actually was highly inefficient because of the fact we weren't just doing it on Zoom. And that, I think, the lesson that we're going to have, because even eventually we will get back to sitting together, but for a long period of time we won't, and actually as long as that, it's not efficient to work.
It's kind of easier to see people on Zoom, and I've had this commented to me a few times as well, where because you can see everyone's face all at the same time, you know, it's like the Brady Bunch or whatever, and you can see people's facial reactions much more easily than if you were sitting beside them in a room, because you can't see someone kind of on the side. It was really, really interesting from that perspective. So Andrew, how did you find being physically back in a room with other people? Like, what was that like after such a long time?
Well, you know, it was a chore, actually. I mean,
you do hear a lot, although, with people with anxiety over this. That has been one of the conversations we've had a lot. You know, obviously we went into our level 2 at the beginning of, we've been at just 2 weeks, we're in it now, and that was the thing that most people felt, was this anxiety around coming out of their homes, anxiety around physical meetings and things. But you know, we're very lucky here that the amount of COVID is so small. But there will be people listening that are going, well, that's all very well and fine, but I've not got my job now, or I'm struggling to even keep my staff. And I think that we have to acknowledge the economic impact on businesses, irrespective of whether they know what their productivity is or not, is just there because they are in industries that have just died because of the lack of custom, for whatever reason. And I think that you know, so we've got employers that are having to go down, and this happens around the world, that are having to go down to a 4-day week and pay for 4 days of time, because they just physically cannot keep paying their staff full time, and they're wanting to try and keep their staff, and they maybe have enough business for a smaller amount of work. But there is that journey to what that looks like. And we've been having a lot of conversations with our unions and with business here and around the world around if that's the case, and we have to accept. So obviously the 4-day week global proposal is that you pay full-time wages for less time. So that's what we advocate for. But we have to acknowledge that that's not the economic reality for a lot of businesses. And so what we've been saying is, well, if that's the journey you have to be on, and you're doing your best to preserve jobs, then have a really open conversation with your staff around what are the key indicators that would mean that their incomes can rise again, but also be on a journey to have their income rise but not go back to full-time hours, because you've used this time to look at your productivity and be clear about how to make your business more productive.
Yeah.
And I think that's that would be a really useful thing for us as an economy to be doing, to position ourselves better for the recovery.
One of the things that we have been doing here is we have been engaging with both government and the union movement over an adoption of a variation of the German Kurzarbeit, so the short-time working policy that the Germans brought in the time of the global financial crisis. And effectively, what that was that companies reduced work 4 days. They were reduced pay 4 days, and then the 5th day, the government made up a proportion of it. I think it was 60 or 67% of the salary for the 5th day. Now that came with a couple of obligations. You had to start looking at upskilling or retraining or what have you. So at the end of the process, you kept economic activity up, and obviously, they were taxing that 67. So the real net cost to government was probably about 50%. And therefore probably, they'd have paid that in benefits in some shape or form. But they then had a journey to get a higher skilled workforce. And what we're arguing is that actually something like that would be a better model, because especially where you have industries that have gone, again, our tourism industry here, you've got to retrain those people to do other things. We've got to find ways to make it economic for companies to go, right, I'm bringing you in, but actually the cost of training you is actually partly going to be borne by the government. And that, as Charlotte says, can then be used as a journey that at the end of that process, you're back, people working 4 days, being paid for 5, producing 5 days worth of productivity. But we've pivoted the whole country and we've made it a better trained workforce, producing therefore higher value as far as their businesses are concerned, which in turn then will stimulate more economic activity. So I think it's a very clear and simple strategy to be adopted, and we'd like to hope that governments will move beyond what is just short-term, how do I vaguely subsidize jobs for the time being, to actually something that's a wee bit more structural, a little bit more thought about how we get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic idea. I love that whole concept. We've spoken about productivity a few times, and I know when we spoke the last time, Andrew, you mentioned about asking staff themselves how to define productivity, and it's something that I kind of get asked a lot about is how do you define productivity, or what are the steps that people can take to start looking at productivity rather than looking at time, looking at productivity instead?
Well, here's the thing. I love this. Every time this one crops up, I love it. So they're freely admitting to you at the moment, therefore, that they have no idea what productivity is in their business. Now, actually, that's been okay, right? Never even thought about worrying about why I check productivity. And now you say, well, let's go to this thing, and they go, well, how do I know what productivity is? Well,
you weren't worried about it before. So that's because you were so worried about time.
Yeah. So that's the point. This is a journey that everybody has got to go on.
Yeah.
To understand what productivity is. Now, therefore, if you don't know what productivity is, ask the person who's actually doing it. Not saying it's right. What we're saying is, what is it? I.e., how long does it take you to do this? How much stuff are you producing? What is it that comes out? And you can start to get a feeling of a benchmark around that. Now, if you go back to, you know, early industrial theory, you have people with top stopwatches doing time and motion studies. It's not a million miles away from that, but you're not just having the person with the stopwatch. But you are starting to say to staff, let's understand what drops out of this. And what's the benefit? The benefit is if we can find a way, so I get that, then we will, you know, we'll be in a position that we can offer the 4-day week. Now, I'll just briefly come back to my own company. So we've gone through this crisis without having to take a government subsidy. We've seen almost no drop whatsoever in our revenue lines. Now, that's partly because our people had understood productivity. They were very flexible because we built this structure around 4 days. So there's always someone backfilling or what have you. And so we were able to send our staff home with almost no impact at all on our revenue lines. And a quick back of the envelope calculation says we're now twice as productive as our biggest competitor on an hourly basis per employee. Now, that's what you get from this. And I don't need to worry now about what productivity is, or is that team doing that. I'm looking at the higher level matrices, which is all I was probably doing the first time. And I'm saying I can see how productivity is flowing through the business. So we've always had this mantra, don't overthink this. If you don't know, anything you get is an improvement, and you can always monitor at the top level by looking at what your revenue looks like, what your profit looks like, what your net promoter scores look like, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You've got those matrices. If they all go up, actually this is working. And worrying about whether, you know, somebody down the bottom is doing X or Y is sort of irrelevant. You weren't checking it before, but it's a discipline. What you're really doing, all right, so the other big hint here is it's not about you understanding productivity, it's about them understanding productivity. In other words, what is it that I am doing that I should not be doing? Because if that is standing between me and a day off, I'll stop doing it. And if they stop doing it, and you've recruited the right people, they will then, by definition, produce more, because they've stopped doing the things that are stopping them doing the work. Now, it's not that hard, right?
Simple.
I think the interesting thing about doing work from home is that you lose a lot of that sort of faffing around that you do in the office. And you know, we often talk about, you know, you come home, you have had a very busy day. Oh, how was it? I've had a very busy day. But busyness is not productivity.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
And it's that confusion between that, and so you know, it's a really important differentiation to make. So, you know, we see people all of the time sort of talking about how busy they've been over there, but most of your day's full of work avoidance meetings. So it's the staff members making a decision around everything that they do. Does it add to the outcome that my team is responsible for? Is one of the questions they'll ask themselves. And is this more important than going home? But when you are at home, because we're working remotely and we're working flexibly, then there will be other things that we will want to do with our time. Now that we've all developed vegetable gardens and things like that, you'll be watching your lettuces wilt and you'll be going, I need to go and watch the garden. So it's about understanding how we will newly work. There are, of course, you know, there are other social things that we need to take into consideration. There are people who do struggle to work from home. You know, large families, not great internet, low education, other disruptors at home that make working from home and working flexibly that a little bit more difficult. And we need to look at, you know, what are the resources we can put behind those people so they can have an equal opportunity to be as productive and engage with the workforce, but not necessarily come into work. Because obviously for them, going all the way into the city for work has a higher economic impact on their family income. So what does that look like? Can we repurpose some of our university space and libraries and things like that so that people can use those sort of facilities to work quietly and get, and engage properly in the economy. So, you know, as I say, this is the exciting thing about this is it gives us an opportunity to completely reframe the way we do it. And I strongly believe that the companies that do this and that use this time properly, they will be the ones that will survive long term and, you know, and come out the other end.
Yeah, and I think the key, of course, is remembering that flexible working is just that. Now, if we have in our company, we don't insist that you do the 4-day week. You can work 5 days. So you can do, you know, 5 days or 4 days or 2 half afternoons, or come in late, go home early, and of course it applies all the way down to people working part-time as well. But the key is it's flexible, it's opt-in. Now, just because we like working from home doesn't mean that everybody does. And if people want to come to the office, and that's probably going to be the young, because often they will be, well, especially in cities, you know, it's the social aspect of it. We should be happy with that, right? The point about flexible working is it's just that, it's flexible. Doing what works for you, which then works for the company. So that's what we've got to bear in mind. The danger, of course, is that what we neatly do is we say, right, well, we had law in the office, and now we're going to enforce flexible working. And what we mean by that is you're going to work from home. Now that's not.
Yeah, which is what the Optus thing have done.
Yes, that's right.
You know, and so what will happen is their workforce will change over time to people who only want to work from home, and those who want to work in a more, you know, more social environment, they will go and work somewhere else. So that there will be that change. But that means that you'll end up with a business entirely full of introverts who are happy to work completely isolated from their colleagues. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing either.
No, I agree.
You know, the great thing about a dynamic workforce is its diversity, and that's not just in gender or ethnicity or anything. That's in the way that we think and the way we react, that we bring. You know, all of that sort of thing is quite important in terms of how you have a workforce.
Yeah, you make a very valid point there about the diversity within work, and like you say, it's not just about ethnicity and gender and things like that. It's exactly that you know, bringing diverse opinions to how we do things, I think is really, really important at work. But if you change how you work to just be like, okay, we're only going to have flexible working, like this working from home, we're not going to have an office at all anymore. Like you say, it shifts the dynamic within the workplace over time in such that's not something I had really thought about or considered before. But
it's a thing, right? So you've got to, people also say, well, you know, we miss the water cooler chat. We miss that, you know, getting around the thing where we can socialize and come up with an idea. Well, here's another thought, that over the last, you know, 6-8 weeks, we've all been migrated to Zoom. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had conversations with people from all walks of life, from all over the world, in a whole variety of different things, whether it be, you know, wines after 4 o'clock, which are organized by one charity and they pull people in, or it's been conferences that we've pulled together. Now, I would never have had those opportunities to get those people, often from a diverse background, in a room at the same time, talking to each other. So bizarrely, we've lost one part of socializing and coming up with ideas, and we've replaced it with something else, which has got other merits. So therefore, you both have merits, both work in an organization, but you've got to recognize that actually there are some great benefits that have occurred as a consequence of this Zoom technology that you also have to build in to the future design of your company and how you expect the company to operate. And if all you do is say, right, well, I want to go back to get that, you're going to lose the diversity of opinion that we've been able to get as a consequence of this type of technology. So it is on multi levels. This is not a simple solution. This is something that business leaders need to think about, how you redesign, rethink, reimagine the business of the future.
Yeah.
Yes, because if you're not reimagining the future, you're re-engineering the past.
Yes. And that's the quote I used from the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
From Charlotte. Yeah, I mean, it's just a fantastic quote. But like you made such a good point there around the kind of, well, what has come up quite a few times is the social aspect to it. So if there's a way to, like you say, continue exposing ourselves to these diverse opinions and these diverse thinkers through doing various things on Zoom and connecting with people who we wouldn't normally connect with because we have this technology, as well as bringing people together physically whenever we're able to do that, to form that kind of, I think it encourages a huge sense of bonding and belonging among staff to actually physically bring people together. I think it's hugely important to be able to do that, because I mean, it makes a huge difference to meet someone face to face and then have a relationship with them online versus only ever having a relationship
or the other way
online,
or both, you know, the other way, having this Zoom relationship and then suddenly meet them in person. I mean, this is quite interesting thing. I've you know, because we are able to go out, you know, I've had a couple of face-to-face meetings this week, and these are with people that I've been talking to on Zoom and everything, and then you go in and you go to hug them because you know them now. You can't, obviously, but you oh no, we can't. But it's changed the way that otherwise it's a much more distance conversation over social media or an email or things. But the Zoom thing, I've sat watching you with your puppy on your lap or your children walking past or whatever. It's broken down this barrier that I've seen, see you in your home, you see me in my home. It's a very different thing. It's quite interesting. One of the charities that we work with, which works with children of disadvantaged backgrounds, and they're part of their program is with mentors, you know, mentoring these young people. And their observation was that the mentors had a really great insight into these children, because they have to book time because the family only have one device. So for them to meet with them, the child has to find time when in between the parents and everybody else, and you know, because quite often there's a lot of people in these households as well. So they have to find time. And then when they're on the phone to them, the child has no privacy. There are people walking back and forward and things, and it gives them a real visibility into the challenges that people have in their lives. And I think that as employers and business leaders, you know, and you know, employees, we need to go back into this with a generosity that accepts that not everybody has the same advantages or disadvantages as you.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. I read an article that kind of related slightly to what you're talking about there. Laurie Gottlieb, she wrote a really great book actually called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. So she's a psychotherapist based in LA. And she was saying she's shifted her business now where she's doing everything online, and the kind of things that come up based on being able to see into someone's home are very different to what would come up in a therapy room, for example. So she notices things, or, you know, just various things that crop up because of the fact that someone is in their home instead of being in the therapy office. And I thought that was quite interesting.
And I think if you can extend that, I know looking at some statistics out of the UK, they're talking about the efficiency of primary care, so visits to the doctors largely being done online, and they found incredibly that actually it's very, very efficient. But it's the same. I've pulled you up on screen. I can tell whether your house is leaky. I can tell whether the reason that you've got what is a cold or a pneumonia is because actually the house you're in isn't very heated, it isn't, etc., etc., etc. Now, okay, sometimes it's been on over phone rather on screen, but the reality is it gives you that perspective. And I think, you know, a lot of bodies will revisit how a lot of what we do is done now, and because of the perspectives that we've got and our ability to have that glimpse into people's lives.
And potentially it will change. I mean, I use the doctors as a good one, because my doctor is a good half-hour drive from the city where we're based, and so I, you know, have to make decisions about going to the GP based upon time that I have available to do it, because I can pretty much guarantee he'll be running about an hour late as well. So the whole adventure will
similar problems all over the world, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're one of those sort of people that has to pop to the doctor for for blood pressure medication, or some of these sort of quarterly things, how we reinvent how that looks, where you might pop into the pharmacy who will do a certified blood pressure and send that information to your doctor, so you can pop into the pharmacy very near you, and then your doctor can have a look at that, interview you over Zoom, and then prescribe. And so it's far more efficient for everyone concerned. And how we find all of those things that are coming up, and perhaps people will be more likely to engage with their doctor. People, I won't go to the doctor, but I don't want to create a fuss. Well, it's not so much of a fuss if I'm just doing it over Zoom. I haven't had to drive to see you.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And yeah, like, I mean, that's the reason I wanted to do this series all about the future of work, because it means different things to different people. And I wanted to hear a variety of perspectives on, like, what does that actually look like? What do you see is happening currently, and what do you think can change, and what do you think needs to stay the same? And I hear people talking about new normal, the never normal, and like, nothing will ever be the same again. That's 100% guaranteed.
Well, my fear is that we will revert to the old normal and entrench some of those bad examples. I mean, we talk about how the future of work, that what we had didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a model that we forced everybody into, for the main part. I mean, obviously there were enlightened employers, but we had a model that we forced everybody into, and it didn't work for business either. This is the mad thing. It doesn't work for the people and doesn't work for the business. So reimagining what it will be like, and adapting so that your future workplace reflects your business and your people.
And I think the thing that you've got to focus on is that throughout history, I mean, maybe we should start reteaching history, there's a thought, because you quite often can draw the lessons. But, you look at the way in which, for example, Europe evolved after the Black Death and Plague. You had a reduction in the workforce, material reduction in the workforce. So what does that mean you've got to do? Well, you've got to think about how you mechanize. And that directly takes a bit of time, but it directly leads to the beginning of industrialization, industrial revolution.
And innovation.
Yeah, sadly, you have wars which cause the same problem. But, challenges are the things that make innovation. And that's what we've had. And so this is part of a normal progression. This one happened to be a pandemic, but it could history is full of something that's just not very good.
Yeah.
And so
we've just not had one for a long time.
Yeah. So the reality is now that this is the normal. It's just that you don't get these things happening on a daily basis. But when they do, that's when the world starts to move, and that's when the world changes. And this has given us an opportunity to do that sort of rethinking, and we can see the benefits of it. Now, provided that we don't spend all our time worrying about the pandemic itself, and we look through that and say, what was good as a consequence of that? Very easy to just focus on the bad.
Yeah.
But what was actually good? And how do we hang on to the good? And if we can do that, then the benefits, the long-lasting benefits of this will be far more material, certainly from a social perspective and from the quality of life perspective of people on this planet, will be far greater than the adverse impact of the pandemic. Now that,
and it should be as well, because I mean, if you think about as a society, we are far more enlightened around each other's emotions, around happiness at work, around how we feel. If you think about the last big hiccup for the Western world, of course, was the Second World War.
Yeah.
And that was at a time when men came back from war and they didn't talk about it. Well, we talk about it now. So theoretically, this kickstart to what we are doing should have the more benefit to us, because we are more enlightened in terms of how we adapt to it and how we engage with each other and how we accept each other's
I'm
emotions.
I'm not commenting on that.
Oh, you're not commenting
I'm not
on,
commenting
you know,
on
that. You don't want to talk about
No,
it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Even the men in this world are being encouraged to talk about their emotions.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and you know, we you know, when we were in Ireland and engaging with the team around the 4-day week, and you have statistics in Ireland around 98% of care is done by women. In the Irish community. So how is that going to change post-COVID when we've sent everybody home, and so therefore far more of the men in your society are actually engaging with care duties just because they're home? And so what would that look like? What's the jump start for the Irish society with things like that? I think it's, you know, yeah, I mean, COVID is bad. I don't want to deny that, but there are some really exciting things that should come out of this, particularly if we let them.
Definitely, yeah. No, I totally agree. And you know, you can't kind of downplay the awful, devastating effects that it has had, and I kind of wanted to do that with the kind of clip podcast as well. But I also wanted to focus on like what are the good things and what are the good changes to come out of it, because you know, it kind of, in a sense, it is what it is, and it happened and it is happening, but actually focusing on the positive, I think, makes it better.
Well, it's the Darwin thing, really, isn't it? Adapt or die.
And again, I'm sorry, going to be the student of history, but British losses on the first day of the Somme on the 1st of July were twice as bad as COVID.
Oh, really?
One day.
Wow.
We would have lost more people on Chanock Bear in Gallipoli.
Yeah.
Far more people on Chanock Bear in one night than has happened here. So yes, it had the potential to be devastating, and you can form your view whether some of those things were, shall we say, over-egged a little bit. You know, clearly the medical profession is always going to say that. But leave that aside for a second. The big issues here are economic. Now, in other parts of the world, countries have to operate, you know, look south, sub-Saharan Africa is running with malaria, Ebola, MERS, SARS, and this. And they've had to keep economies going, right? So you can do it through these things. The important bit that comes out of this is actually what you do with it. You know, yes, it's been an economic disaster.
Yeah.
So how do we reposition our economies now to recover better, faster, stronger? That's the issue. As a tragic human tragedy for most of the Western world, you know, it has been mild in comparison to what we've done to ourselves in the past.
Yeah.
And that's a thing to do. You have to, I do believe you have to keep that perspective.
Definitely.
Because, you know, if you lose that perspective, you end up, I think. The
perspective for people is the problem is always worse when you're living it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when we look back on what history will talk about this time, and you compare it with other events in our history, then you know the globalness of this is the different factor, but the effect of it is probably, you know, going to be on par with other things that
and it's
we hope.
And therefore the challenge is, of course, it's a very long-term impact. I mean, you know, the impact of this could run into decades.
Yeah.
And it will certainly run into decades if we let it. And it will certainly run into decades if we don't rethink what we're meant to be doing. I mean, because remember, you know, before we went into this, we had a pandemic. It was the mental health pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of the workforce had a stress or a mental health issue. All right, now actually this is giving us a pathway to address that pandemic.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the statistics that already existed, the UK lost 15 million worker days a year from mental health or workplace stress. So there are some, you know, when you put in some comparisons around what's in there. So as we come out of this, what's the pathway to repairing that? Now, flexible working, I think, will be, and the ability to work remotely will be part of how we
just on that, we've started to do some statistics in our own company around things like sick days. They've halved, you know, and continuing to go down.
Yeah.
And we're seeing all sorts of patterns start to emerge in terms of our own workplace data that are saying that actually we're getting lots of other benefits that are flowing through. People aren't having to take those odd little days of leave either. So because of that, they're taking bigger blocks of leave. Now that's making, you know, more time to unwind, more time with the family. There are lots and lots of little things that drop out of this. And so again, you know, coming back to how we go forward from here, you can see if those things were translated on a national stage, wherever it was, actually there would be significant benefits to the economy, to society. And that's what I'm hoping, is that we don't lose sight of those benefits, and we could, because we'll sit here looking at the wreckage that is central, local, family finances, and go, actually, just getting those sorted is the job. And actually, it's not just the job. We've got to do more than.
And even from a practical basis, I mean, if we go back to the same old, and everybody hikes themselves back into the office, but we're all being told that if you get a sniffle, you can't come to work. You know, and so therefore, so how does that work out for a family? You have a child that gets a sniffle, so they can't go to school, so you have to stay home, and then the next child comes down with it, and so you're still home. So let's say 4 days by the time you're home. It's still just a sniffle that we all get, and you know, seasonal sniffles, and then you get the sniffle, and so next thing you know, you spend a whole week at home. That if you haven't got flexible and remote working to be able to pick up that, then you've taken a week of sick leave that you didn't need to take, and you wouldn't have taken before COVID. You would have just, everyone would just muddle through, right? So we have to be very careful of how we manage, you know, where islands like New Zealand, we have generous, maybe they used to say they're not generous enough, but we have generous sick and holiday pay and those sort of leaves. But if we change the way you have to engage with those numbers, we will run into issues of people feeling financial stress again. And as you know, the mental health in the workplace, a large part of that comes down to financial stress, financial pressure, especially for families. So, you know, those are the sort of things that we have to accept. And one of the great things about the remote and flexible working, the 4-day week, when we've seen a marked reduction in the number of sick days that our staff take. That was pre-COVID, when they were pretty much all coming into the office. And so, you know, if you can change the way that people can balance their time, then you change markedly the way your company operates.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered quite a lot of different kind of areas. Is there anything else that hasn't come up that you'd like to bring up in terms of practical tips or any areas that you wanted to talk about?
Read Andrew's book.
Yes.
So it's a bit of like no. So if any of your listeners are out there and that they are like curious as to how to make this work for themselves, they can do several things. One is they can go onto our 4dayweek.com website. So that's the number 4dayweek.com. There is Andrew's book, which was written before COVID, but the lessons that are in the book apply now as ever. And it's full of so much useful information around, you know, not only how to do 4-day week, but why and what, you know, a whole pile of the peripheral things around that. But also, if you're on our 4-day week website, there is our white paper that you can download, which talks about the journey that we went on and how Perpetual Guardian made 4-day week work. And then on our events page, we are actually hosting a 4-day week webinar. It's on the 18th of June in New Zealand, which is the night of I've had to try and fit international time zones in. So it is at 10 o'clock at night in Ireland. But it's 9 o'clock in the morning in New Zealand, and it's other hours, obviously, in the US. and we've got some great people on that. We've got Jan Emanuel Deneve from Oxford University. We've got Ashley Whelans from Harvard. We've got Margaret Cox from Ireland. We have Alex Pang from San Francisco, and obviously ourselves. We will also, we've got a couple of other guests that are yet to confirm. So it'll be a very international conversation, and people should get quite a lot out of that, I think. But they are always welcome to connect in to Andrew and I as well, either on LinkedIn, or they can just email through to ceo@4dayweek.com. We're always happy to talk to people. We are trying to work out a structure where we can have people in your own markets that would be able to help you as well. So, if people have questions, just ask them. We'll give you the answers.
And as always, the big piece of advice is just don't overthink it.
Yeah.
We said it last time, we'll say it again.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it.
This is not as hard as you think.
Yeah. Brilliant.
But no, look, I do think we have as I said, we have a great opportunity to build back far stronger and better. And it's incumbent upon us, I think it's incumbent upon business leaders, political leaders everywhere to take this opportunity and to reimagine what we do. And I think we have to grab that now.
Brilliant. And the question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what makes you happier at work?
Well, okay, I'm going to do a lockdown one. We've probably had more fun from a business perspective and doing things, and done some really, we for example, when our Poppy Day was cancelled here, our Anzac Day cancelled for the main appeal. We designed, built and operated a virtual Poppy Day fundraising campaign for our return services people. That came out from walking on a beach, going into a supermarket, seeing what was closed when we're in lockdown, and then actually we ran and devised the whole thing from here. Now that's work, right? So work is not about where you are. Work is about what you can imagine and what you can do. And the great thing about, to me, the great thing of the last few weeks has been the fact that we can do that, having these conversations, interacting with people all over the world, and that has been so exciting and such a privilege.
And for me, I get to talk to people all over the world. I have, people often sort of say to me, "What do you do?" I say, "I have interesting conversations with people all of the time." And I just love it when I have a conversation with a CEO or a head of HR, and the conversation ends, and that person says, "I'm going to take this to the board." They get it, they understand it, they've read the book, and their next step is that they want to get the board on board, because they really see how a new way of working will make where they work so much more satisfying. Brilliant.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today. Time difference means it's nighttime here in Ireland, and it's a very early morning in New Zealand. So we managed to make it happen all the same. So really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.